the House of Lords at a press conference this morning to do the right thing. But the Labour Party continues to insist the plan is a gimmick and unworkable, but its alternative is more of a five-point sham rather than plan. And speaking of the Labour Party, is it trying to steal the Tories' clothes once again? Shadow Chancellor Rachel Reeves has boldly claimed her instincts would have lower taxes. But has she forgotten which party she belongs to? Plus, a number of developments for the monarchy this week, with news of health concerns for both the King and the Princess of Wales, but also suggestions that the Prince of Wales could break ties with the Church of England after 500 years. State of the Nation starts now. I'll be joined by my most intellectual panel this evening, GB News senior political commentator Nigel Nelson and the editor of Conservative Home and former Tory MP Paul Goodman. As always, you know I want to hear from you. It's a crucial part of the programme. Email me, mailmog@gbnews.com. But now it's what you've all been waiting for, the news of the day with Polly Middlehurst.
Jacob, thank you and good evening. Well, the top story tonight is that the Prime Minister is indeed calling on the House of Lords to do the right thing and pass his Rwanda bill. Rishi Sunak, who wants to control the UK's borders, spoke to officials at Gatwick Airport this afternoon to highlight, he said, the importance of border security. Well, the third reading of the Rwanda bill passed through the Commons unamended last night with a majority of 44. Dozens of Tories had threatened to rebel, but in the end, only 11 voted against it. Mr Sunak says peers must now support the legislation as an urgent national priority.
There is now only one question. Will the opposition in the appointed House of Lords try and frustrate the will of the people as expressed by the elected House, or will they get on board and do the right thing? It's as simple as that. We have a plan, and the plan is working. Last year was the first year the number of small boat arrivals went down. Not just down by a bit, down by a third compared to crossings in the year before.
Well, the Prime Minister's plan to stop the boats comes as the Home Office confirmed today 358 migrants were intercepted trying to cross the English Channel yesterday in 8 small boats. That means 621 migrants have arrived in the UK so far this year, despite the poor January weather. LNER train drivers on the East Coast Main Line will walk out on strike next month in their long-running dispute over pay. The ASLEF union has announced train drivers will go on strike for 5 days from February the 5th. And in the last couple of hours, ASLEF has announced its support for the English National Opera, who've also launched their Fair Wage on Stage campaign, demanding better pay and better conditions. Thousands of jobs are at risk at Tata Steel as they've decided to push ahead with their plans to close both blast furnaces at their Port Talbot plant in South Wales. The decision coming despite unions today putting forward proposals aimed at saving jobs, which Tata has rejected. The redundancies, to be completed by March next year, will see 3/4 of the 4,000 staff on site at risk of losing their jobs. Unions will now consult members, with industrial action not being ruled out, they say. Prince William has visited Kate in hospital where she's recovering from planned abdominal surgery. He was seen driving out of the private London clinic this afternoon with his close protection team. The Princess of Wales is said to be doing well after her operation on Tuesday, but it is expected she'll stay in hospital for the next 10 to 14 days. Meanwhile, Queen Camilla has said His Majesty the King is fine and looking forward to getting back to work as he awaits treatment for an enlarged prostate. King Charles says he's keen to go public with his condition to encourage other men to get themselves checked out. That's the news on GB News across the UK on TV, in your car, on digital radio and on your smart speaker by saying play GB News. This is Britain's news channel.
Yesterday alone, more than 350 migrants crossed the Channel from Calais in 8 small boats, meaning that more than 600 people have arrived over the past 5 years in spite of inclement weather. It's rather fitting that this reminder that the Channel migrant crisis continues should occur as the government's Safety of Rwanda bill passes through the House of Commons. The migrant crisis carries on and we need a solution as soon as possible. As Kenneth Lord Clark, hardly known for being on the right of the Tory party, has pointed out, no one has put forward an alternative to the Rwanda scheme, and we can no longer simply do nothing. But that's precisely the Labour Party's plan to solve the migration crisis: masterly inactivity. As things stand, the polls suggest that the Labour Party is on course to win a majority of more than 100 seats at the next election. So it seems to me only right to discuss the opposition's five-point plan to tackle the Channel migration crisis. So it was really interesting yesterday in the House of Commons that all the Conservatives wanted Rwanda to happen one way or another. They disagreed on the degrees of rigour with which it should be applied, but they disagree on the end result. Whereas all the opposition parties wanted to do nothing. They wanted to fiddle and twiddle. So what are these 5 points? Number one, to crack down on criminal smuggler gangs. Well, this is stating the absolutely obvious. Why would the Labour Party be any more able to crack down on migrant smugglers when the countries in which they operate have not been able to? Northern France is rife with migrant smugglers, as well as many other European countries along the Mediterranean. If they haven't been able to solve the problem so far, why is it that some mystical, mysterious socialist can suddenly wave a magic wand and do it? Points 2 and 3, to end hotel use and clear the backlog, and reform resettlement routes. We hear again and again the mantra by the Labour Party of safe and legal routes. The problem with this is that if we had safe and legal routes through which people could apply for asylum, the Channel crisis would not be solved, but made much worse. The Centre for Policy Studies has estimated that roughly 750 million people, 750 million, 10 times the population of the UK, worldwide fit the definition of a refugee as defined by the Refugee Convention. In other words, if we were to set up lots of safe and legal routes around the world, we would see vast swathes of applications, and inevitably that would lead to a backlog, and we only have finite resources, which would open up the incentive for crossing the Channel. There also seems to be a myth running around that if only the Tories were better managers of the Home Office, the backlog would dissipate. But this is nonsense. How does one process people quickly when they have no documentation, with many throwing their passports into the sea? Oh, and of course, the judges keep on making it impossible to deport them. Point 4, a new agreement with France. Well, we've heard that once or twice before. I think this suggests a slight naivety on the Labour Party's part. There is a reason it's been so easy for migrants to leave the beaches of Calais. The French aren't that unhappy for them to go and cross the Channel. Once migrants leave France, they cease to be a French problem. And number 5, tackle humanitarian crises at source to help refugees in their region. Well, the 5 key countries migrants are coming from are Afghanistan, Iran, Syria, Eritrea and the Sudan. If the Shadow Foreign Secretary, David Lammy, has any ideas about solving the problems of the Taliban, the Supreme Leader of Iran, Ayatollah Khamenei, the Syrian dictator Bashar al-Assad, the Tigray ethnic cleansing or the Sudanese civil war, I would love to hear them. But I'm afraid these problems are beyond the capabilities even of His Majesty's government, and Mr Lammy is not suddenly going to solve them. Fundamentally, this is a non-plan. It achieves nothing because it's missing the most vital component of all, the component that the Rwanda plan does have, deterrence. It's clear that the Labour Party simply isn't serious about tackling the migrant crisis and is intent on committing itself to very little before the next election. As always, I want to hear from you, mailmog@gbnews.com, and I'm particularly pleased to be joined by a friend of the programme and former Labour Cabinet Minister, Sean Woodward. Sean, many thanks for coming on.
Good evening.
I know the job of the opposition is to oppose, but as we get closer to an election, doesn't it have to have something to say in place of the government's policy?
Well, I think, to be fair, we have had something to say, and that's the 5-point plan that you have just peppered rather sternly. I say that, Jacob, because we're focusing on Rwanda all of the time at the moment. But what you and I know is that even if Rwanda was a good idea, which I don't think it is, and the Labour Party doesn't think Rwanda as the country to go to, it's not about not having a third-party country, it's Rwanda that we have the objection to. But Rwanda itself will not solve the problem. We've got a backlog of about 100,000 cases. Rwanda could probably process through their system a few hundred a year. How many, nearly 100 years to get round to processing these cases? So my real worry here, and I hear what you just said, but I think there's a really big deception on the British public here being run by all politicians, which is that somehow the row about Rwanda, if only you could solve the Rwanda issue, would solve the migration issue. And it doesn't stop the boats. It doesn't deal with the hotel use. Although it is symbolic. And as we know, when the Prime Minister was Chancellor, he actually recognised that Rwanda as a deterrent, which is your word that you used, wouldn't work. And as we now know, he had terrible arguments at the time of his leadership election with Suella Braverman and others because he said it doesn't work.
The deterrent is absolutely the key point. Nobody, I think, is proposing that the 100,000 people who are already here should be sent to Rwanda. It's about people who are arriving, and that if people arrive, are detained and are deported, then there is suddenly a deterrent, because the people who are coming are spending their life savings to get here, and they don't want to spend their life savings to end up in Rwanda. That is the power of the deterrent.
Well, I wish it was that rational, and I don't think it is, because I think what you and I would absolutely agree on is that those individuals in those boats, and I suspect everybody listening or watching this program would also agree, they're desperate people. Nobody is, I think, in their right minds in Britain, which is the most incredibly generous-hearted nation, whether you're Tory, Reform Party or Labour. People are good people in Britain. Nobody is saying these aren't desperate people. The thing is, people feel they shouldn't be coming here. And if they do come here, it needs to be a fairer system. So really our conversation is about how do we get a fairer system? How do we get a system that processes things? And now to your question, one of the things that worries me has been that since the Conservative Party became the government in 2010, there has actually been a drop in the number of people smuggling convictions that have been carried out by the courts. Now, you haven't got to look at the future to see the fact that the last 13, 14 years have seen the courts fail because of the processes the government are using to convict the people smugglers. Now, if the people smugglers can get away with their crimes, they're going to traffic these people.
I don't think you're comparing like with like, because before the small boats became the preferred route, people were coming in lorries. When people were coming in lorries, there was somebody smuggling them who was in the UK. The people smugglers, by and large, are not operating in the UK, so you wouldn't expect them to be prosecuted under UK domestic law.
No, but it's part of an overall system, because when you say, for example, they came into the UK, we actually then sent them back. One of the other failures of the government at the moment has been actually the drop in returns of people.
Returns
We've actually seen a 50% drop in the number of people returned. But in the last 18 months, the government has spent nearly 300 million cooking up this deal with Rwanda, which will only deal with about 100 cases a year. That money would provide 6,500 case officers in the Home Office to process the backlog and return them. But we don't have that money because it's being sent to Rwanda.
The government said there's no limit on the numbers going to Rwanda, so I think 100 a year is pessimistic.
No, it's not.
Sure,
but Jacob, that's misleading the public.
I've got to go to my panel. I'm sorry, I've got to cut you off.
No, but that's misleading the public, because Rwanda's got to process those people. It's all very well sending them there, but they've then got to be processed. And what the Court of Appeal showed was they can't process more than 100 a year.
Well, we're helping them with those resources. But, Sean, thank you as always. The Duracell Bunny of politics, Sean Woodward, joining me this evening. But now my panel, GBNews senior political commentator Nigel Nelson and the editor of Conservative Home and former Tory MP Paul Goodman. Nigel, Labour needs to come up with something serious between now and the election, doesn't it?
Yes, but I mean, you've been a bit sort of cavalier about the detail that they have actually come up with. So you were rubbishing the idea of tackling the people smugglers. I mean, the detail behind that is to use the Rwandan money for a dedicated police unit within the National Crime Agency, embed some of those officers with Europol, and get back the data sharing back into the databases that we had before Brexit. So there is some detail there about how they would actually do it, and the most interesting part, I think, is the settlement scheme. At the moment, you have to be on British soil to claim asylum. If we had a resettlement scheme for people who've got relatives in the UK, we could process them somewhere else.
But that's been suggested would be double the number that are currently coming here illegally.
The same rules apply.
If we were taking the share of people who are coming into the EU, which is what the EU has said it would demand,
I'm not talking about
if we joined
the
that,
EU.
but that's what the Labour Party said. They were going to join the EU scheme, and then they would get returns, but they would also take a share directly. They did say that.
No, what they said was they will try and negotiate a deal with the EU.
And the EU's been
your
clear,
side
you
have
have
come
to take
up
your
with
fair share.
Your side have come up with the idea that that means taking in 100,000 migrants,
if not more.
But that only applies to EU member states, of which we are not one. So quite clearly,
Well, then why would the EU give us this return system?
Well,
which they didn't give us when we were a member of the EU.
I don't. Well, we did have returns deals with them.
Dublin didn't work.
That is arguable. I mean, if you go back to 2018, fewer than 300 people crossed the Channel in 2018, but half of them went back.
Paul, Rishi Sunak's tried his best. Are we going to get any planes leaving between now and a general election? So does it in a way matter if Labour just says back?
My sense of the Rwanda scheme is that you have to stand back, which, to be fair to Sean Woodward, he just tried to do, and look at the problem overall. And over the next 10 to 15 years, I'm absolutely convinced with the sheer scale of illegal migration into Europe and also of people seeking refuge, there's going to be a huge impact and therefore enormous demand for these schemes. My hunch, it's only a hunch, is that Rishi Sunak, unfortunately, is a bit ahead of his time in trying to do this before other European countries get there, and there's a major rewriting of international laws about refugees and asylum.
So it's reforming the laws and therefore making it easier to do and getting rid of the legal obstacles that way.
I was very interested in this sort of element of what Sean was saying. Sean was saying, look, you have this huge sort of international issue. And I think what the politicians have not yet done, but I'm convinced they will do over 10 to 15 years of whatever party all over Europe, is they will have to start looking at the whole way the conventions work. Mm-hmm. The element I didn't really understand about Labour's new policy, perhaps someone can explain this to me, is if you open up safe and legal routes, how many people are you going to take? The demand is almost exponential.
Well, that's a very important point. The Labour Party has issued a statement by a spokesman saying the Tories broke the asylum system. £400 million will be wasted on the Rwanda gimmick, which hasn't removed a single person. The Conservatives should stop taking the public for fools, stop blaming everyone else and do their job. That money could go into strengthening our border security through Labour's plan to crack down on the criminal smuggler gangs with cross-border law enforcement and a major new returns unit. Well, I think I've read that as seriously as I could manage. Rather awkward reading out opposition propaganda, but thanks to my panel. Coming up next, we'll be discussing the Prime Minister's stern warning to their lordships earlier today that it ought to do the right thing. Plus, could the 500-year-old bond between the sovereign and the church be about to break?
I'm Christopher Hope.
And I'm Gloria Di Piero, bringing you
PMQ's live here on GB News. Every Wednesday, we'll bring you live coverage of Prime Minister's questions when Rishi Sunak and Sir Keir Starmer go head-to-head in the House of Commons.
We'll be asking our viewers and listeners to submit the questions that they would like to put to the Prime Minister, and we'll put that to our panel of top politicians in our Westminster studio.
That's PMQ's live here on GB News, Britain's election channel.
Good afternoon, Britain.
Good afternoon, Britain. Join us, Tom and Emily,
To find out what's happening in the heart of Westminster.
and why it matters to you.
Weekdays from midday, we bring you the most compelling stories from across the United Kingdom.
And from your doorstep to our inbox,
That's right, we want to hear from you,
GB News.
Britain's news channel. Wake up to the headlines with Headliners every morning at 5 a.m. We treat you to the day's biggest stories before anyone else, 7 days a week. You can catch up on everything you need to know before you've even had your kippers. Headliners every morning at 5 a.m, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
GB News, unlike other broadcasters, isn't obsessed with the London-Westminster bubble. We think there's a nation beyond the M25, and that's why we talk about the issues that matter across the land. Join me on State of the Nation, 8 to 9 o'clock, Monday to Thursday, on GB News. Daisy's listening, and you should too.
In the GB Newsroom, we bring you the news as it happens. With our team of dedicated journalists across the UK, we're ready to give you accurate reporting every day. When the news breaks, we'll be there with bulletins on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Big news, big debates, big opinion. Patrick Christie's Tonight is the week's biggest show.
Every weekday, 9 to 11 p.m, we've got the inside track on the day's top stories. There'll be sharp takes you won't get anywhere else.
We will set the news agenda, not just follow it, and I want to bring you along for the ride.
Whatever it is, we'll have our finger on the pulse.
It's news, but it's this close to entertainment.
Patrick Christie's Tonight, 9 to 11 p.m, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Your weekend starts here with Friday Night Live with me, Mark Dolan, 8 till 9 on GB News. Big stories, big guests and big laughs as we get you ready for a cracking weekend. That's Friday Night Live with Mark Dolan, Fridays 8 till 9 on GB News. Bring your own drinks, the admission's free.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my two comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back. I'm still Jacob Rees-Mogg, and this is still State of the Nation. We've been discussing the Labour Party's lack of a migration plan, and you've been sending in your views. Jill says, how is sending people to Rwanda protecting our borders? Surely it's a failure that these people got past our borders illegally in the first place. Well, Australia managed something, defended its borders quite well in this way of thinking. Steve says, the government has wasted an 80-seat majority, I believe, on purpose. And Roy, thank you, Roy, because you have teed us up very nicely for the next subject. What can the government do if the House of Lords reject the bill? Well, whenever a bill of importance reaches the House of Lords, I think it's important to remind the upper chamber of the sword of Damocles held by a horse's hair that is the Parliament Act of 1911 that hangs ominously over its head. After a tumultuous few years of dispute over Lloyd George's People's Budget that was to increase the lower rate of income tax to 3.75% and the upper rate to 5%, almost the good old days, the Commons resolved to limit the powers of the House of Lords and passed the bill which in its preamble states that it intends to substitute for the House of Lords as it is at present exists, a second chamber constituted on a popular instead of an hereditary basis. So let the upper chamber bear in mind the unfinished business in the Parliament Act when it debates and amends the Safety of Rwanda Bill in the coming weeks. And as the Prime Minister said this morning at his press conference, do the right thing. Well, my panel is still with me, Nigel Nelson and Paul Goodman. Paul, the Prime Minister said, House Lords, do the right thing. Will they take any notice?
I think it's not necessarily in the Labour Party's interest to stop Lords, because if they do, they will naturally get the blame from the Conservatives. Whereas, if they eventually let it go through and it goes to the courts and it's held up in the courts, the Labour Party could then turn around and say, well, we told you this wouldn't work. We let it go through in the end, but it has, and you see, we said all along it just wouldn't be operable. So I think it may get through. I thought originally the Lords would simply throw the toys out of the pram. I'm now not so sure.
Do you think they will pass amendments and there'll be a bit of ping-pong, or just to register inevitably?
Inevitably a bit of ping-pong. You know, you don't want to let the thing sail through without any opposition. So I think perhaps the most likely thing is they put up just enough fuss, sort of, to not officiously keep alive the bill.
Now, Nigel, what do your friends in the Labour Party intimate to you? Do you think Paul is right, that they will actually let it go through? Because Conservatives obviously don't have a majority in the Lords, but if the Labour Party doesn't oppose something strongly, it will get through.
I think there'll be amendments, as Paul just said. And I would have thought one of the biggest dangers comes from Tory peers rather than Labour ones, on the basis that an awful lot of them are moderate One Nationers, and that's where the problem would come. I thought Rishi Sunak's bizarre press conference this morning contained a veiled, though unspecified, threat to the Lords that if they don't, as he put it, do the right thing, there will be consequences. And I wonder if one of those consequences might be going into a general election on a kind of who governs ticket, elected MPs or unelected peers.
And there is a quirk in our system that if you create peers during the dissolution, they take their seats immediately, whereas if you create them during a parliament, you can only enter 2 on any individual day. So if you want to create 500 peers, the time to do it is before Parliament reassembles after dissolution.
OK, I didn't know that little technicality, but that's interesting.
But so do you think Rishi is gearing up to reform of the House of Lords? Is that the implicit threat?
That would be a sort of Gotterdammerung, I want to say a sort of Dominic Cummings-type solution. And I don't finally read Rishi Sunak as the kind of man who would take that path. Of course, the Conservatives with the Lib Dems did have a go at reforming the House of Lords and making it semi-elected or wholly elected. That didn't come to anything. So
it was a dreadful scheme.
It was not a good scheme. And I was there. I have to confess, I was voted for an appointed House to continue rather than the worse option of having 2 houses with lots of members paid more by the taxpayer in conflict all the time.
But do you think a peers versus the people led by Rishi Sunak for the people strengthens him? Is a route to success?
I don't think it's going to come to that for the reasons I've given. I, with Nigel, was really rather baffled by this press conference this morning because, after all, it's well known that Rishi Sunak wants to change the subject. He wants to get onto the economy. He wants to fight an election that's, it seems now, is better the devil you know, against the devil that's Keir Starmer. So I was puzzled at doing this morning without actually having anything to announce, which is the usual bread and butter of a press conference.
Very few Number 10 press conferences actually have anything to announce, or when they do, you don't want to hear it.
Usually more than this.
But I think this is interesting. If the Prime Minister wants to get off migration, he's getting away from the subject that the Tory voters in 2019 are most concerned about. It's moving away from what the base of Tory support wants. This doesn't seem to me to be a good idea.
If you want to win an election, go with the things that the voters are most concerned about, and migration still doesn't come top on that.
But it does with 2019 Tory voters.
Well, it might do. He doesn't want to lose a few of the 2019ers. I can understand that. But then we have to see if the Rwanda scheme. I think it's a gimmick, but the gimmick might work in the sense all he would need to show he's got somewhere is for one plane to take off with one migrant heading to Rwanda. But that's what I mean. The whole thing has become, for some reason, a total obsession of the Tory party. People out there are more concerned about cost of living in the NHS.
I'm not convinced by that, because I think the opinion polls show that the people who voted Tory at the last time are very concerned about this. We had Matt Goodwin on with Nigel Farage saying they are more concerned about this.
But you have to have a broad offer in an election, and of course cost of living will be top of the list. But migration is an important issue. It's vital to the voters you're talking about. The legal figures, as we know, have, I think the government would now admit this, got completely out of control. And for some voters, whether you're able to control your borders or not is an existential question. And to be fair to Sunak, I think Ken Clarke had a point. You can shoot down the Rwanda scheme with all sorts of holes in it, but no one's come up with a convincing alternative.
So Kenneth Clarke supporting Rishi Sunak on tough immigration policy. Who would have thought it?
I'm not all that surprised.
All right. Well, thank you very much to my panel. Coming up, as the post office scandal shocks the nation, we'll be looking at another scandal. Plus, could it be the end of the Church of England as we know it?
Your weekend starts here with Friday Night Live with me, Mark Dolan, 8 till 9 on GB News. Big stories, big guests and big laughs as we get you ready for a cracking weekend. That's Friday Night Live with Mark Dolan. Fridays 8 till 9 on GB News. Bring your own drinks. The admission's free.
Wake up to the headlines with headliners every morning at 5 a.m. We treat you to the day's biggest stories before anyone else, 7 days a week. You can catch up on everything you need to know before you've even had your kippers. Headliners every morning at 5 a.m, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
In the GB Newsroom, we bring you the news as it happens. With our team of dedicated journalists across the UK, we're ready to give you accurate reporting every day. When the news breaks, we'll be there with bulletins on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Big news, big debates, big opinion. Patrick Christie's Tonight is the week's biggest show.
Every weekday, 9 to 11 p.m, we've got the inside track on the day's top stories. There'll be sharp takes you won't get anywhere else.
We will set the news agenda, not just follow it, and I want to bring you along for the ride.
Whatever it is, we'll have our finger on the pulse.
It's news, but it's this close to entertainment.
Patrick Christie's Tonight, 9 to 11 p.m, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Good afternoon, Britain.
Good afternoon, Britain. Join us, Tom and Emily,
To find out what's happening in the heart of Westminster.
and why it matters to you.
Weekdays from midday, we bring you the most compelling stories from across the United Kingdom.
And from your doorstep to our inbox,
That's right, we want to hear from you,
GB News.
Britain's news channel.
GB News, unlike other broadcasters, isn't obsessed with the London-Westminster bubble. We think there's a nation beyond the M25, and that's why we talk about the issues that matter across the land. Join me on State of the Nation, 8 to 9 o'clock, Monday to Thursday, on GB News. Daisy's listening, and you should too.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my two comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
GB News is Britain's news channel, and now you can support it. All you have to do is scan that QR code that's up on your screen right now, or you can go to gbnews.com/support and become a GB News member. You'll have fantastic benefits. We're also going to organise special events where you as GB News members can meet the presenters, the on-screen faces. Scan the QR code or go to gbnews.com/support. Thank you so much.
Welcome back. We've been discussing the Rwanda bill passing to the House of Lords, and you've been sending in some pretty forthright opinions. Roger's rather gloomy, I'm afraid. He says, actually, come to think of it, if Britain continues along the current path, no one will want to come here. Problem solved. Oh, dear. Scott says, unfortunately, living in the West Midlands, I'm in my early 30s and would say this is happening about 20 to 25 years. Too late. As the nation has been gripped by the post office scandal, another scandal which has been linked to 10 suicides and 1 abortion was debated in Parliament today, the loan charge scandal. Owing to a change in the law in 2016, which put the responsibility on individuals for tax that their employers should have paid, HMRC has run harsh tax demand campaigns, with 10 suicides and 1 abortion, as I mentioned, being linked to this. Many people, including teachers, nurses and council workers, signed up to schemes through their work agencies and were assured they were HMRC compliant, only to discover later that they had been misled. But perhaps more disturbingly, HMRC itself employed people who used these very schemes and in so doing effectively endorsed their legitimacy before backtracking on it. Well, an HMRC spokesman said, the loan charge seeks to recover tax that has been avoided by disguising income as loans. We take the well-being of all taxpayers very seriously and recognise that dealing with large tax liabilities can lead to pressure on individuals. The support we have in place to help people settle their previous tax avoidance includes offering payment by instalments. If a tax scheme sounds too good to be true, it probably is. My intellectual panel is still with me, Nigel Nelson and Paul Goodman. Paul, there seems to me to be a general problem of government that when mistakes are made, there is a huge reluctance to put them right, and they drag on for decades. And this seems to be another one of them, that the HMRC de facto approved some of these schemes and then decided it had made a mistake and has put bills on taxpayers of sometimes tens and hundreds of thousands of pounds.
It was always certain that after the post office scandal, all sorts of other grievances would be brought to light, as was the case today in the debate that you spoke, which people would say are like the post office scandal. I don't quite see it like that. I think with the post office scandal, very clearly there was a computer problem that was covered up. It's not the case here. And after all, HMRC have got to try and strike a balance because they've got the interests of the taxpayer to protect. That said, I think you've got a point in this sense that, first of all, as I understand it, lots of people in these schemes were effectively forced into them by their employers. And so there's a really question about whether HMRC have acted justly there. And then next, there's this element of retrospection and a kind of question about whether HMRC has overdone it. And then there's a question which the government only now seems to be beginning to answer about going after the people who put the individuals in these schemes. So there does seem to be a bit of a culture problem at HMRC, as you suggested.
And the going after people who went into these schemes and not the promoters, which is what they did to begin with, seems to be very unfair because at the beginning of it, it's clearly a mis-selling scheme if it's not right. Very few people thought these schemes up for themselves. And the other thing is, which actually pointed out by John McDonnell in the Chamber this afternoon.
I saw him doing it, and I thought it was very good.
Really important that this got through in the wash-up just before the 2017 election. So Parliament never really looked at it. And so retrospection came in and the removal of the right to take it to court. So instead of individuals being able to take their case through the whole system, it was determined if you were a loan charge, this is it.
Yeah, and I think that what today showed was that what happens if MPs take their eye off the ball, which is actually not a criticism of MPs, it just shows how much they've got to get their head around when these things are happening. But yes, I mean, certain alarm bells should have rung, that the idea that HMRC were chasing, first of all, they chose the easy targets. They were chasing people and then throwing all their tax into 1 year, which meant they were paying something like 45% tax where they didn't need to. So I think I agree with Paul, it's not a miscarriage of justice like the post office. What is similar to the post office is the way they went after the small people who can't fight back.
And that's really important because if you were paid in this way for 10 years and you were paid £20,000 a year, you would have been taxed at 20%. Now you're suddenly getting £200,000 taxed in 1 year at 45%, which is desperately unfair.
And when it came to actually going back and chasing the people who promoted these schemes and the companies that actually ran them, charging people 20% to go and do so, that didn't happen until 3 years ago. So, but yet they're chasing people who owe money from 2010.
I just want, Paul, you mentioned culture. Isn't this the problem of merging custom and excise and inland revenue, that they had two very different cultures, because custom and excise dealt with smugglers and the inland revenue dealt with people who sent in a tax return. And they were very, very different cultures. One not very aggressive, the other inevitably more aggressive.
It may be. I'm not certain enough about the background to the merger, but what is interesting here, and is like the post office, is the way in which ministers arguably let these big organisations hold sway when these matters are debated and listen to their civil servants and close down the options perhaps before they should. But the way individual MPs, as you were doing this afternoon and as James Arbuthnot did over the post office, they are the people who helped to lead the fight back, as we saw in the ITV drama of Mr Bates v the post office. So ministers, may or may not be doing their job and may be too easily swayed by civil servants. But sooner or later, constituents go to their members of parliament, and some of them, as James Arbuthnot did over the post office, really, they do work that's admirable.
Well, we can't promise an ITV drama, but we can promise to come back to it on GB News regularly, because it is an important subject. It's Davos season, which means the wealthiest and most powerful meet in an obscure Swiss ski village to discuss world issues. Why they do this has never really been understood by me. They seem to enjoy themselves, but the Shadow Chancellor, Rachel Reeves, is there and has boldly declared her intention to steal the Tories' clothes. Speaking to The Telegraph, she said her instinct is to have lower taxes and will ensure that success will be celebrated under a Labour government. This is beginning to sound like Peter Mandelson saying he didn't mind people being filthy rich. Perhaps even more revealingly, she seemed to suggest that tax cuts could be in store for top earners too. Well, it is interesting to ask what on earth's going on in the Labour Party. Is it Sir Keir Starmer or is it Nigel Farage. Well, still with me is my panel. So, Nigel, is Keir Starmer becoming Nigel Farage and becoming a low-tax man?
I don't think so. I mean, what Rachel Reeves was talking about, it was an ambition. She wasn't making any promises that she would actually do it. The area I think that Labour will look at, by all the indications, the way they've been talking, is on personal allowance and thresholds. At the moment, frozen till 2028. That means 4 million people will pay tax for the first time who didn't before. Plus, you've got 7 million people being dragged into higher tax brackets. That's the area I think that Labour will look at, but don't expect it happening in the first few months. The first thing they've got to do is grow the economy and get debt down.
OK, so they're just reversing from the Dennis Healey view of squeezing the rich until the pips squeak.
Yeah, I mean, that if they change thresholds, obviously, even the rich will benefit.
Right, after they've put 20% VAT on school fees, which they've spent in about 15 different ways.
Well, Rachel Reeves simply said that her instinct was to have lower taxes. I mean, my instinct is to be the next Taylor Swift, but somehow I doubt it's ever going to happen. I don't see where the money is going to come from.
Even I've heard of Taylor Swift. That's very rare. Very few pop stars I've heard of.
I shouldn't assume that you had. I know Nigel will have done. But I can't necessarily assume
for my viewers,
you make a very good Taylor
Swift.
It's just not going to happen, this, unless there's growth in the economy, which has not been happening for all sorts of reasons, largely world conditions, war and COVID and all that. And so I really don't see where this is going to come from.
It's very Blairite, isn't it, that you give an interview to the Telegraph, say you're Big Tent, you're going to a paper that doesn't normally support you, you're saying something you're not saying to other people, so it's exclusive to them, winning favours with Tory paper and saying something Tories want to hear. You've got this ambition. It's quite the Blair strategy.
Well, actually, it casts an interesting light on the way all the political parties do things, which is this micro-targeting of small groups of voters rather than having a broad national message. Of course, Rachel Reeves is targeting Telegraph voters. She and Keir Starmer have been doing a very impressive job of it, which the Telegraph is only too happy to entertain.
Yes, though, as a Telegraph reader, it hasn't converted me, or at least not yet.
I can't see you voting Labour.
But Tony Blair did do this extremely successfully, didn't he? And this seems to be following that playbook, which is the one thing that historically has made Labour electable, when it moves away from the hard left.
Yes, I mean, I think the way that Tony Blair did it was to change politics completely. So the idea of pinching the best policies from both left and right, sticking them together, tough on crime, right-wing policy, tough on the causes of crime, left-wing, things like that actually work, because then you appeal to the broadest number of people. And that, I think, is what Keir Starmer is clearly doing, the same kind of idea. He wants to be much broader, certainly, than Jeremy Corbyn was.
Excellent. Well, thank you very much to my panel. Coming up, is it a potentially popish plot? Is the Prince of Wales secret Catholic? I have a feeling not. He might be something else altogether, but we shall see. Thank you.
Join us every night on GB News at 11 p.m. for Headliners, which is 3 top comedians going through the next day's news stories, which is exactly what you need, because when the establishment has gone crazy, you need some craziness to make sense of it.
Headliners. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper. We've got it covered for you. Every night at 11 p.m. and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there.
So join us 11 p.m. every night on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Tired of the usual focus-tested, pre-prepared Westminster runaround? Well, so am I.
So you want higher taxes?
Is your department to blame for this? Are you rethinking this policy? Every Sunday at 9:30, I'll be sitting down with those in power to get the truth about the issues affecting you.
Let's be honest, we've known about the cost pressures of this project for years, not months.
That's the Camilla Tominey Show, a politics show with personality. On GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I think the most exciting bit for me is talking to people.
People who I think are ignored often by the major news channels. We're going to give news they want to hear. There's a voice there that needs to be heard. I think there's a chance here for a diversity of opinion to be expressed, which you don't find elsewhere. It's really exciting.
We don't hold back. We're free to say how decisions that are taken here
affect us all around the country. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Good afternoon, Britain.
Good afternoon, Britain. Join us, Tom and Emily,
To find out what's happening in the heart of Westminster.
and why it matters to you.
Weekdays from midday, we bring you the most compelling stories from across the United Kingdom.
And from your doorstep to our inbox.
That's right, we want to hear from you.
GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Every Sunday from 11, join Michael Portillo.
There'll be topical discussion, looking at the week before and the week to come. So kick back and relax at 11 a.m. on Sundays on GB News with me, Michael Portillo. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Your weekend starts here with Friday Night Live with me, Mark Dolan, 8 till 9 on GB News. Big stories, big guests, and big laughs as we get you ready for a cracking weekend. That's Friday Night Live with Mark Dolan. Fridays 8 till 9 on GB News. Bring your own drinks. The admission's free.
Big news, big debates, big opinion. Patrick Christie's Tonight is the week's biggest show.
Every weekday, 9 to 11 p.m, we've got the inside track on the day's top stories. There'll be sharp takes you won't get anywhere else.
We will set the news agenda, not just follow it, and I want to bring you along for the ride.
Whatever it is, we'll have our finger on the pulse.
It's news, but it's this close to entertainment.
Patrick Christie's Tonight, 9 to 11 p.m, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Since the 16th century, one role of the monarch has been to be the head of the established Church of England, otherwise known as the title actually awarded by the Pope, Defender of the Faith. It was given to Henry VIII because of his opposition to, of all people, Luther as the Protestant tsunami was sweeping through Europe. A new book by Robert Hardman, who's been on this programme, claims that the Prince of Wales, on becoming king, may take on a less spiritual role within the Anglican Church, as despite his admiration and respect for the institution, he is not a regular worshipper. As some has argued, this reflects modern Britain. But as a key role of the monarchy throughout its history, how far is the Prince of Wales obliged to take on the role of Defender of the Faith when he ascends to the throne? I'm joined now by Church of England vicar and internet personality, the Reverend Dan Beasley. Reverend, thank you very much for joining me. Doesn't the Prince of Wales just have to become head of the church? He's got no choice. It's in law.
It is in law. And we saw with the coronation of his father, King Charles, he took oaths which have been in law. And so, yes, in one sense, there is that he should do that. But there's also, you know, I've been thinking about this. It comes across he's a man of integrity. He's saying, look, I don't go to church. There's many of his generation, he's just a few years younger than me, who don't go to church. And is saying, well, maybe this needs to change. So there's a lot of conversations, very torn. He's showing where he's at. And should he really be leading the church when he's saying, I'm not a Christian, I don't go to church? But as you say, it's been in part of law. He's the king. He has many responsibilities, which I'm sure he doesn't want to agree with. But that's part of the job, isn't it? He's come to serve, not to be served.
That's right. It's part of the duty of kingship. And the last king not to go to church regularly was Edward VIII, and that didn't end very well. So it seems to me it's quite concerning if one of the key roles of being king is one that apparently the heir to the throne doesn't want to carry out, that Christianity is part of kingship. It's almost a sacramental coronation. And if you take that out, if it's a merely secular kingship, does it have the depth and link to our history that the monarchy has enjoyed to date?
Yes, well, that's the thing, isn't it? It's not just going back to King Henry VIII. It's going back to Ethelred, back to the 6th century, when Augustine came across and evangelized the nation. So there's this link that is now being reported that he's saying, I want to step away from that. And it is part of his role to defend the faith. That's what was handed on to King Henry VIII. And we're protecting that faith. That's the oaths that he takes at his coronation. But we've also heard he wants to take the coronation, make the service a bit shorter, make it less spiritual, but it's done in a cathedral. It's done by the Archbishop of Canterbury, and he swears allegiance in his oath to Jesus Christ, our Lord and Saviour.
And if the coronation isn't But if the coronation isn't spiritual, it's like the Oscars, it's trivial. It's all about its spirituality and the anointing by the Archbishop of God's chosen leader.
Well, that's the thing, isn't it? It's for kings for many, many centuries have said we are chosen by God. It's our divine right. That's who's called us to this role, and that's who we serve. So we have to ask the question, and Prince William himself has to ask the question, who's calling me to this role? You know, it's just line of succession. So yes, I do hold that there's an integrity there, and that's quite admirable, because this is not a statement by him, but it's a big revelation that he's saying. But we are the Church of England. We're an established church, and he leads us. He defends our faith. And we saw with the Queen, as she progressively proclaimed the gospel, called Jesus her King of Kings. It was great.
Well, thank you very much. I think we're in agreement. And it's been quite a week for the royals, because the King and the Princess of Wales have both gone in to hospital, which has led to discussions about the openness of the royal family and what level of privacy they're entitled to. And do they get any privacy? Bear in mind, as recently as 1936, the Home Secretary attended the birth of royal babies, and this stopped in 1936 for the birth of Princess Alexandra, the Queen's cousin, and was ended prior to the birth of Prince, now King Charles, in 1948. So do we owe the royals a private life? Well, I'm joined by a man who knows the royal family more intimately than most, the former royal butler, Grant Harold. Mr. Harold, thank you for joining me. Do you think the royal family are entitled to any privacy?
Good evening, thank you for me on. It's a difficult one, isn't it, Jacob? Because with the royal family, to an extent, they want always to have privacy, which most people want the privacy. But the other side of the argument, of course, is we all pay something towards having the royal family. And people, I've seen comments on social media over recent years where people feel that they're entitled to kind of know everything that's going on. And this has been a classic example of what happened yesterday with the Prince of Wales going to hospital, getting that statement, not obviously giving details, but making us aware that obviously she's had a major operation, but then so soon after mentioning about the King's procedure next week, but giving details, which is, I think you agree, is really unusual.
But kings historically led lives of no privacy at all. So Charles I took all his meals in public. Until the reign of William IV, there was the Groom of the Stole who inspected the king's movements, to put it in a pre-watershed fashion. The kings of France dressed in public, with a Grand Duke handing them particular items of clothing. The sort of quid pro quo of royalty is that everything you do is public.
It was very much like that, wasn't it? Like yourself, I've kind of read and learnt that it was very much a kind of public way of life. Everything they did was kind of witnessed. And I suppose in the last 150, 200 years, they've got more and more privacy back, to the point where now, to an extent, they get more or less a private life. But then we've seen in recent years that when they feel it's invaded, they obviously take action to try to protect the privacy. But as I said, it's that thing where a lot of people, I don't think it's nosiness. I think people just feel they want to be part of it and to show support and kind of be there for all these kind of big occasions and to show that they care. But again, with the royal family, the problem for them is, yes, they're one of the most famous families in the world, but they are, at the end of the day, they're a family. They're a private family, and they do like to keep their privacy.
But you're a former royal butler. Even in their private lives, they have a staff that looks after them. So they're still always doing things with people around them who aren't members of their family, unlike most families in this country.
Absolutely. Absolutely, you're absolutely right. I mean, that's the one thing I was amazed when I worked for the family, was the amount of access you get as a member of the household, from a butler's point of view, or the valets, or the people within the houses. You're around them all the time, so you get to know them like your family. I think Carson used to say you never cross the green baize door, but you do get to know them quite well.
Well, thank you very much, Grant. And finally,
thank you.
I'd be remiss if I didn't mention this bizarre new guidance issued by NHS Scotland to cope with the cold weather and icy streets. Apparently, you should walk like a penguin. Dr. Amelia Crichton, Director for Public Health at NHS Greater Glasgow and Clyde, said while it might seem silly to walk or waddle like a penguin, the alternative may be a nasty injury or even time in hospital. Everybody knows there's only one cure for cold weather and icy streets, and that's moving to Somerset, where the sun always shines, even during the wintriest of nights. So So the people of Scotland, concerned by the sub-zero temperatures haunting the kingdom, should head south to God's Own county, where they will be very welcome. Anyway, thank you again to my panel, everyone who's joined me. Up next, it's Mark Dolan. Mark, what is on your bill of fare?
Well, following the political coup over Rwanda that failed to materialise, is Rishi Sunak's leadership once again under threat? I'll be speaking to Dame Andrea Jenkins, who says Rishi must go. Why did Tory rebel Brendan Clark-Smith change his mind? All of that, plus, is King Charles guilty of oversharing? A busy 2 hours. We're live in 5.
Oh, that's going to be extremely interesting. A very good programme. This is me done for the week. I will be back on Monday at 8 o'clock as usual. But, oh, joy of joys, I'm heading down to Somerset now. My car is parked outside. I'm waiting to get there to see the glorious Somersetshire sunny, warm weather.
A brighter outlook with Box Solar, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Good evening, welcome to your latest GB News weather update. Friday will be another dry and sunny day for most, and showers are becoming much more limited to the far north, but there's still a snow and ice warning in force for many areas of northern and western Scotland. High pressure is centering itself more centrally across the UK overnight tonight, and through Friday that will bring the drier weather. So through the night tonight it will turn dry for many areas, plenty of long-lived clear spells, some mist and fog, freezing fog in fact for some areas of Wales and inland England along the Pennines as well. But in the far north of Scotland we'll see that continued risk of heavy snowfall. The snow will turn a little bit slushier as the night progresses, but there'll be some ice on any untreated roads by the morning. It's going to be another very cold start tomorrow morning, as low as -9 in southern rural areas. But there'll be plenty of sunshine once again, another bright and sunny day for the bulk of the UK. We've got a bit more of a westerly wind, so it will be a bit breezier on the coast, but that does mean that the temperatures will be a little bit higher than recent days, 6 or 7 degrees in the southwest, but still a fairly gloomy day with plenty more snow showers to come in the northwest. A very unsettled day on Saturday for north and western areas, with the winds picking up as we see a marked change in our weather for the weekend. Some quite heavy rainfall to come for parts of Northern Ireland and very many northwestern areas of the UK. And as the temperatures start to climb through the weekend, the snow will start to melt across much of Scotland, so that could bring some flooding issues. See you later.
That warm feeling inside from Boxed Boilers, sponsors of weather on GB News.
When the news happens, it happens here.
And really important breaking news.
Breaking news this morning.
On TV, radio and online, the news starts here on Britain's Newsroom.
All the biggest stories and the answers that you need from across the UK and beyond.
Join Britain's Newsroom from 9:30 on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Have a great Saturday night with me, Leo Curse, on this Saturday Night Showdown. It's a crazy world out there, so come and make fun of it with me, my panel of comedians, and a couple of people who actually know what they're talking about. This Saturday Night Showdown is your front row ticket to the clown show every Saturday, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Your weekend starts here with Friday Night Live with me, Mark Dolan, 8 till 9 on GB News. Big stories, big guests and big laughs as we get you ready for a cracking weekend. That's Friday Night Live with Mark Dolan. Fridays 8 till 9 on GB News. Bring your own drinks. The admission's free.
Now then, Lee Anderson here. Join me on GB News on my show, The Real World, every Friday at 7 p.m.
I'm not eating bloody cat. Are you
Delicious.
mental?
Open your mouth. OK, here comes a train. Reminds me of the scene in Singing in the Rain.
Adam, is that a good one?
Whoa! Join me at 7 on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Good afternoon, Britain.
Good afternoon, Britain. Join us, Tom and Emily,
To find out what's happening in the heart of Westminster.
and why it matters to you.
Weekdays from midday, we bring you the most compelling stories from across the United Kingdom.
And from your doorstep to our inbox.
That's right, we want to hear from you.
GB News,
Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
In the GB Newsroom, we bring you the news as it happens. With our team of dedicated journalists across the UK, we're ready to give you accurate reporting every day. When the news breaks, we'll be there with bulletins on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Wake up to the headlines with headliners every morning at 5 a.m. We treat you to the day's biggest stories before anyone else, 7 days a week. You can catch up on everything you need to know before you've even had your kippers. Headliners every morning at 5 a.m. only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
GB News, unlike other broadcasters, isn't obsessed with the London-Westminster bubble. We think there's a nation beyond the M25, and that's why we talk about the issues that matter across the land. Join me on State of the Nation, 8 to 9 o'clock, Monday to Thursday, on GB News. Daisy's listening, and you should too.
This is Patrick Christie's Tonight with me, Mark Dolan. Patrick is in bed with a hot toddy.
There is now only one question. Will the opposition in the appointed House of Lords try and frustrate the will of the people?
Fighting talk from Rishi Sunak, but are you being lied to about the Rwanda plan? Conservative MP Marco Longi goes head-to-head with trade union activist Andy MacDonald. And there's no peace with the Tory rebels as the no-confidence letters come flying in. Yes, indeed, influential former Minister Dame Andrea Jenkins tells us how many have turned on the PM. She's up next. Plus, after Lee Anderson admitted this was why he changed his mind in last night's vote.
The Labour lot was all giggling and laughing and taking the mick, and I couldn't do it in my heart of hearts. I could not vote no, so I walked out.
Who could blame him? Well, I'll be grilling his best mate, Brendan Clark-Smith, on why he voted for Rishi's bill, despite resigning in protest 24 hours earlier. Also tonight, top Telegraph columnist Alison Pearson reveals brand new information about a conspiracy at the heart of the Post Office scandal. You will not believe the story. Plus, fearless royal journalist Angela Levin gives an update on the King and Kate's health scares in the Royal Dispatch. And could the real Keir Starmer please stand up?
Did you want him to be Prime Minister?
I didn't think the Labour Party was in a position to win the last election.
Oh, he's wriggling on the line. Well, Anne Widdecombe's furious verdict on whether the Labour leader has the principles and the ethics to be Prime Minister. That's coming up shortly. On my fiery panel tonight, I'm delighted to welcome the aforementioned Alison Pearson, Conservative peer Lord Bailey, and best-selling author Amy Nicole Turner. So, an action-packed 2 hours to come. Get the kettle on. It's absolutely freezing out there, and let's get to work. The PM defeated the Rwanda rebellion last night, but polling has the Tories at rock bottom. So is it time to replace Rishi Sunak or face electoral oblivion? Let me know your thoughts, Mark at gbnews.com. Lots to get through, but first the news headlines and Polly Middlehurst.
Mark, thank you, and good evening to you. Well, tonight the top story from the GB newsroom is that the Prime Minister is calling on the House of Lords to do the right thing and pass his Rwanda bill. Rishi Sunak, who wants to control the UK's borders, spoke to officials at Gatwick Airport this afternoon to highlight, he said, the importance of border security. Well, the third reading of the Rwanda bill passed through the Commons unamended last night with a majority of 44. Dozens of Tories had threatened to rebel, but in the end, only 11 voted against it. The police watchdog is to investigate any missed opportunities prior to the deaths of toddler Bronson Battersby and his father in Lincolnshire. The 2-year-old was found dead next to the body of his 60-year-old dad, who'd suffered a fatal heart attack in Skegness. GB News East Midlands reporter Will Hollis has the details.
The latest details in a disturbing story that has shocked the nation are that thieves broke into the home of Bronson Battersby and his father, Kenny, who had been found dead there here in Skegness just hours after social services made the discovery. It said in the Daily Mail that they stole money and pills from the dead family. Now, this is something that has been confirmed, that an investigation is underway by Lincolnshire Police in a story that has not only shocked social services, but shocked the nation as well.
Will Hollis. Now, train tickets are twice as expensive when bought from platform ticket machines than those booked online. The consumer group Which says same-day tickets are particularly highly priced, and in their research, best value fares were either unavailable or hidden among too many options. A journey, for example, from Northampton to Cardiff was found to cost £107 from a ticket machine, but was only £43 if bought online. 2 in 5 railway stations now don't have ticket offices. So when passengers don't have access to tickets online, the only option is to buy from a platform ticket machine. Meanwhile, LNER train drivers on the East Coast Main Line will walk out on strike next month in their long-running dispute over pay. The ASLEF union has announced train drivers will go on strike for 5 days from February the 5th. And this evening, ASLEF announced its support for the English National Opera, who've also launched their campaign. It's called the Fair Wage on Stage, demanding better pay and conditions. And lastly, Prince William has visited Kate in hospital this afternoon, where she's recovering from planned abdominal surgery. He was seen driving out of the private London clinic this afternoon with his close protection team. The Princess of Wales said to be doing well after her operation on Tuesday, but she is expected to stay in hospital for the next 10 to 14 days. Meanwhile, Queen Camilla has said His Majesty is fine and looking forward to getting back to work as he awaits treatment for an enlarged prostate. King Charles says he's keen to go public with his condition to encourage other men to get themselves checked out. On TV, online, DAB+ radio and the TuneIn app, this is GB News, Britain's news channel.
Thank you, Polly. A very, very busy show to come. Top of the evening to you. I hope you are very well. Another day of high drama that would have the scriptwriters of Coronation Street and EastEnders salivating. Following the political coup that never was, like one of those fireworks your dad bought from Argos that didn't quite light up the sky, an unusually bouncy Prime Minister addressed the nation this morning.
We have a plan, and the plan is working. Last year was the first year the number of small boat arrivals went down. Not just down by a bit, down by a third compared to crossings in the year before.
Is the plan working, Rishi? Because 621 migrants have crossed the English Channel in the past 5 days. 358 people arrived in 8 small boats yesterday alone. Crow as he might, it's pretty clear that stopping the boats as a policy is about as achievable as world peace or Elton John growing a full head of hair again. And the public know it. This is our reporter Sophie Reaper asking locals in Lee if they trust the government to tackle immigration.
No, not really.
Why not?
Just because they've promised other things and they've never really followed up.
No.
Tell me why not?
Why not? How many chances have they had? How many chances?
I don't trust any government to tackle the immigration at the moment.
Why not?
I think it's too difficult to tackle. Not one country in Europe's managed to tackle it.
You, my viewers and listeners, the great British public know exactly what's going on. Now, we saw plenty of pearl clutching from the so-called Tory wets, the left of the party, including Bournemouth MP Tobias Ellwood. He had harsh words for his rebel colleagues.
Is just the sad but selfish and dangerous game the right of our party is now playing. At a time the election is approaching, we should be showing discipline and not hogging the headlines for the wrong reasons. Disunity does not go down well at the ballot box.
Selfish colleagues, ouch. But this Tory psychodrama helps only the unscrupulous gangsters who continue to take blood money to enable these illegal and dangerous crossings. And of course it helps the cervix-free leader of the opposition, Sir Keir Starmer, who may as well now send Mrs Starmer to John Lewis to go through curtain fabrics for number 10. New polling today has Labour an astonishing 27 points ahead, with the Tories falling to their lowest level of support since Liz Truss was Prime Minister. That's almost like the good old days, isn't it? But of course the biggest loser is you, the British voter, who now has nowhere to turn. The Tories won't stop the boats and it will get worse under Labour. Welcome to hell. I believe that we now need a political revolution, given that the majority of Brits want illegal and legal immigration reduced and who now look to be politically homeless. I'll be dealing with that in my monologue at 10. You won't want to miss it. Right now, though, let's speak to Dame Andrea Jenkins, the only Conservative MP to publicly submit a letter of no confidence in the Prime Minister. Dame Andrea, you submitted your letter in November of last year. You were attacked at the time. Do you feel vindicated?
I mean, I'm not trying to score points here because, you know, at the end of the day, we've seen the party fall apart. But we've got to act, Mark. I mean, I think this is last chance to saloon now. We're having a general election this year anyway. Let's get rid of Rishi. Let's get somebody who's got balls of steel, who will actually be prepared to come out of the European Court of Human Rights and stand up to these judges and all the bleeding heart liberals who are trying to stop us sending them to Rwanda and stop us turning around the boats. That's what we need, somebody who's strong like that, Mark.
How swiftly could a new leader be elected? Could it be an accelerated process? I guess it would need to be, Dame Andrea.
Yes, of course it could. I mean, it could be done within, 6 to 8 weeks. We could do it within the parliamentary party within a couple of weeks and then give them a month's notice to the ballot for party members. And I do think we don't want to do like Theresa May did, or like with Rishi as well, where the members don't get a vote. The members must get a vote because let's face it, when they didn't, it's messed up.
Who would be your preferred candidate, or would you care to throw a couple of names out there?
Yeah, I mean, to me, it's got to be somebody on the centre right. You know, Pretty's quite strong, Suella. You know, either one of those, I'd certainly be happy with.
Is this conversation about replacing Rishi Sunak not a gift to Labour, though, Dame Andrea?
Well, I think unfortunately, Rishi is a gift to Labour at the moment. So it's which is lesser of the two evils, really. So this is why I think we've got to act on it. We've got to replace Rishi. And even though he won that vote last night, but hearing that more letters are going into today, I still think he's on borrowed time, Mark. I'd be very surprised if he's taken us into the election.
How many letters do you think have gone in? Because I understand that 53 is the magic number to provoke a contest.
I mean, I was whipping during Theresa May's time to try and oust her. And I'm speaking to people over the last few weeks. And a couple of weeks ago, I did a tally. It was about 29 MPs who told me, but that was pre these disastrous polling, what we've seen at the weekend, and pre this Rwanda farce, what's happened the last 24 hours. So I'm sure that more has gone in since the weekend.
Would the Tories not be a laughingstock if they selected yet another leader in such a short period of time?
I think, unfortunately, as the poll shows, we're not exactly in favour at the moment, Mark. So we've got nothing to lose. So let's just get somebody, as I said, I want balls of steel here who will fight for the British public, not just give PR words, which Rishi does. And let's see if Starmer does even more PR words and he doesn't actually answer any questions. So we need somebody who's ballsy and strong.
Do we have any idea who some of those signatories to letters going into the 1922 might be?
Well, yes, of course. But I was in the whip's office myself. It's not a thing. It's unfair to divulge who. But the ones I know is from both wings of the party.
Wow. Would you throw your hat into the ring, Dame Andrea?
I'm not delusional, Mark. If I put my hat in the ring, I'd get one vote. That'd be myself.
Well, listen, I think that would be a crying shame. I think you're an important voice in Parliament and within the party. Speaking of which, you were one of only 11 that voted against the Rwanda legislation yesterday evening. What's your view of those colleagues who disagreed with the legislation but voted for it anyway, like Brendan Clark-Smith, or abstained like Lee Anderson? What words do you have for them?
I mean, I think, for those two, I like them both in my wing of the party. I just think it's a shame, they've resigned from the deputy chairman of the party. For what? there wasn't going to see it through, which I think was very sad to see. But I know, having been in the Whip's office myself, I'm sure that jobs got promised, so we'll see on the next reshuffle if anybody gets promoted who abstained or who voted for it. We'll see promises of getting more campaign funds. That's how it works, whether it's Labour whips or Conservative whips. So let's see what's been promised. And also, there would have been threatened to pull campaign funding. For example, Theresa May's time, I was told by the party chairman at the time, we're going to pull your campaign funding in your marginal seat if you don't keep your mouth shut and stop trying to get rid of Theresa May. I mean, and I haven't actually had any campaign funds from the party since that day. So I fundraised myself. So they do follow through with threats, but I just said, do your worst. I'll raise the money myself.
Well, that's right. If we're going to talk about balls of steel, you are in possession of at least 2 of those. Dame Andrea, always a treat to have you on the show. Look forward to catching up soon.
Thank you.
And my thanks to the Conservative MP, Dame Andrea Jenkins. Well, Rishi must go, says Dame Andrea. Let's get the views now of my pundits tonight. Daily Telegraph columnist Alison Pearson, Conservative peer Lord Bailey, and author and broadcaster Amy Nicole Turner. Well, this would be suicide for the Tories, wouldn't it, to axe Rishi at this stage?
I like the way Dame Andrea talks about balls of steel. I think we're looking at ovaries of steel, Mark. I mean, I think the 3 main contenders will be Kemi, Priti and Suella.
What about your mate Penny Mordaunt? You were gunning for her in the last leadership election.
I think she would have been a better choice than Rishi Sunak. The Tories wouldn't be this far behind if Penny Mordaunt was leading them. But I think now that the definite feeling, the sense now is that we need someone of the right who will have the guts to do something about immigration. Yes, it's... as Dame Andrea said, it's the lesser of 2 evils, really. It wouldn't be great, would it, to come up with another Tory leader? I mean, Boris was voted for by the public 2019. We've since had 2 leaders, one of whom was voted for by the Tory members, Liz Truss. Rishi Sunak wasn't voted for by anyone. But the problem is, Mark, is he is... the party is in a dire straits. Reform are just 8 points behind the Tories in the latest poll. But he's got 2 huge challenges, moments when he can be unseated. February, 2 by-elections on the same day. Tories are going to get an almighty kicking then. In May, there are the local elections, and that will be a total bloodbath. So if the opposition are going to make a move, if people will unseat him, my question for everybody would be, why would Kemi Badenoch, if she thinks she can be the Tory leader, want to inherit the pile of poo which she would be coming into now, when she could take over when the landslide defeat, and then she could rise from the ashes?
You have a brilliant column in the Conservative supporting Telegraph newspaper. You are countenancing the possibility of another leadership election. You think that is conceivable or possibly even a good idea?
I don't think... I think it's too late now in the cycle. There's not enough time to do it. I think a new leader, a woman leader now, she could lessen the scale of the defeat.
But you don't think it's going to happen? You don't think it's realistic?
It might happen. I'd say it's about 60-40.
If you were a Tory backbencher, would you be handing a letter in tonight?
Yes, I probably would. Look, it's...
You'd have it coming out of the printer. You'd be ready to sign it.
It's a really bad situation.
All right, Sean Bailey, you are a Conservative. What's your view on the idea of axing Rishi to save the Tories?
Look, it's too late. And axing Rishi wouldn't save the Tories at all. What that would do is suggest even more chaos. And if you're a Tory of any sort of standing, your goal has to be, let's steady the ship. You'd be lying if you said we weren't all over the place, at least perceived like that in the paper, needs to steady the ship. I actually think the real risk time will be the local election. There are many Tory councillors up and down the country who pour their life and soul into that job, and it isn't about money, it's about representing their local area. Should they lose their seats and they conceive that it was because of the national picture, they will be livid and they will frighten their MPs into doing something. And if Rishi wants to avoid that, he needs to step out. We don't need management now. The poor decision was made 2 steps ago. First, getting rid of Boris. The reason the opposition are pursuing Rishi so hard is because we got rid of Boris. You lose one Prime Minister, it shows that it's possible, and I keep pursuing you. Now Rishi is reaping that whirlwind. And the second thing is, if you're really concerned about immigration, there's other things we can do. Don't make this taking off of planes symptomatic of your progress, because all the opposition have to do is delay. That's all they have to do.
OK.
What Rishi should be doing is saying, what would Keir Starmer do?
And what would Keir Starmer do? I mean, the bottom line is Labour are laughing all the way to number 10 as we speak. But the elephant in the room is that Labour don't have a plan for illegal immigration, do they, Amy?
Well, interestingly, they do. They've said they'll take back the 400 million from the Rwandan government and use it to process the claims. Once the claims are processed, we will keep the people who deserve to be here, and they will make money in our economy.
OK, what about the ongoing supply of people crossing the channel illegally?
One idea could be processing people in France. That might work. The Conservatives have continually shot that one down. They don't.
The illegal migrants are coming, and the illegal migrants are coming from France.
Yeah, but
so that would be a bit of to and fro. That would be like table tennis, wouldn't it?
We process them in France and take our fair share of people.
Well, we're taking much more of our fair share now.
OK, but Amy, the bottom line is you must be celebrating tonight. I mean, a Labour government looks even more a likelihood than it was just 24 hours ago.
I'm not a guaranteed vote for anyone.
There you go.
However, I would say it's interesting to hear you saying about steadying a ship, because I think the ship is sinking.
Okay.
The ship is the Titanic,
All right.
Sean, let's be honest.
Listen, I want to disagree, but there is some truth in what you're saying.
OK, but listen, here's the breaking news, folks. Even Amy Nicole Turner cannot fully back Keir Starmer, because no one backs him, because
not blindly.
No such thing as a fan of Keir Starmer.
Mrs. Starmer.
That's not what I said, Mark.
Well, perhaps Mrs. Starmer, perhaps his mother as well, and his father, the toolmaker. Coming up next, our very own Alison Pearson exposes brand new information about a conspiracy at the heart of the Post Office scandal. But first, Rishi Sunak came into turbulence when quizzed on when Rwanda flights might actually take off.
Can you 100% guarantee a plane will take off to Rwanda before the general election?
Look, wriggling on the line there. So tonight I'm asking, is the nation being lied to about the Rwanda plan? Tory MP Marco Longi takes on trade union activist Andy McDonald. They're live next. Sparks will fly. This is Patrick Christie's Tonight with me, Mark Dolan, only on